Shalom, friends. What is the spiritual work of Rosh Hashanah? And how does the shofar, the key mitzvah, the key ritual act that we do on this day, the key act of connection we do on this day, how does it embody the work of this day? How does it take us on the journey we need to go on? Or what is that journey? The journey, first of all, is the journey into judgment. Not a very appealing prospect for many of us. Din, judgment, also called in the Sephirot, the Tree of Life, or the Kabbalists, it's also called severity, gevurah. This is not something we usually want to run towards. It's not something so attractive. This is the challenging aspect of life in any moment. So why should we do this? Why would we want to do this? And how do we get ourselves to do this? And what do we get out of doing this? Why is it good for us? Why is it necessary? Well, the second step is when gevurah, din, judgment, evolves into compassion, rachamim, also called tiferet, harmony and beauty, and also called emet, the deeper truth, the underlying truth of reality. So those are the two steps we're going on in Rosh Hashanah. Into judgment, and which we'll talk about what that means and why we need to do it, and then from judgment to compassion. And we see this in all of our classic sources. There's a beautiful midrash that says, who are these people who have this scary judgment, and instead of dressing in black and growing their hair and growing their nails and wrapping themselves up in a black cloak like someone who's scared of the judgment, instead we cut our hair and cut our nails and wear white and make this a festival. So even though it is Yom HaDin, it is the Day of Judgment, even though it has this scary, intimidating quality of judgment, we are celebrating. We are having festive meals. We're dressed in nice clothes. We are having a great time. It's a real chag. We see in Nehemiah and Ezra telling the people, don't be sad today. Don't mourn. This is a day of great rejoicing, and your rejoicing in Hashem, in the Infinite One, is the source of your strength. That's Rosh Hashanah in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. Also, we see in the Code of Jewish Law, we see that we are told to eat and drink and be merry, but not too merry. Don't eat and drink so much that we are full and we lose a certain very important reverence or awe or fear, this yirah. We need to keep this yirah, this awe, this respect for what's going on. So how do we do that? How do we enter into that judgment, and why do we want to do that? And then how does the journey continue? Well, we want and need to do that, I think, because if we didn't have this day, and I was teaching recently in a class, and somebody said, it's like a deadline. We all know that sometimes we only do things in response to really having to an externally imposed deadline. And that's what this is. This is the calendar saying, if we've been giving ourselves a pass for the whole year in certain areas of our lives, maybe in all areas of our lives, if we've been telling ourselves, pat on the back, basically you're okay, I'm trying my best, I'm not perfect, but I'm doing my best, and just leave me alone. Well, we all tell ourselves that sometimes, and that is perfectly valid. But once a year, we say, you know what? I have an obligation to try and raise my game, to really try. And the only way I'm going to do that is by doing a real, honest accounting, which has an aspect of severe judgment in it. It doesn't have to be dominated by severity or harshness. That's just one ingredient of the mix, but it's an important ingredient because that's what will hold us to account ultimately. Practically, in terms of doing this, how can we enter into this if we're not really feeling that right now? If we're basically feeling that we're fine? Well, I suggest trying to reflect on and think of a few areas in our lives where, when we reflect, we realize we could be doing better. Maybe it's certain relationships, certain situations, certain amounts of our time that we're not using in the best possible way. And if you really can't think of something, which happens sometimes because we're just in a certain state of mind where we're just not letting ourselves see it, that happens to everyone, then I suggest thinking of something from your past that now you no longer do. Now you realize you no longer want to do. But at the time, that was who you were then. And I suggest going back in your mind's eye and going back to the person who you were then, who was doing what you were doing then, whatever the behavior was that now you're glad you don't do, and realizing how clueless you were, how much you just didn't get the growth that was waiting for you once you got past letting go of whatever it was that wasn't serving you. So maybe many, many years ago, you've spoken a certain way or acted in a certain way or whatever it was. Maybe it was a certain kind of addiction or habit, whatever it is. Maybe it was a certain relationship you were in which wasn't really serving you. Whatever it is, you couldn't have known then. Maybe you had some intuition, but you couldn't have known quite how far you would have grown afterwards. So I suggest doing this exercise to teach ourselves about how much we have to grow, about how much growth there is waiting for us now. Because right now, none of us is perfect. We're all stuck in various habits and behaviors. And we all act in ways which are not perfect. And we might be telling ourselves, we're okay, we're doing our best, we're fine. That's true on a certain level. But on another level, there's so much growth waiting for us. There's so much growth we can access if we can be a little bit harsh with ourselves this Rosh Hashanah. Really look in the mirror and say, what's my growing edge? Like a tree has a growing edge. That's the place where it's going to grow. We can only grow if we admit that is an edge where growth is actually needed. So that's the judgment part. What about the journey to compassion, and how does the shofar help us with it? Well, compassion is so important because if we get stuck in the judgment, in the din, in the gevurah, in the severity, then actually we're disconnected from the world as it actually is. Our ancient rabbis tell us that this world is only sustainable, it's only able to endure because it was created by the Holy One taking the quality of rachamim, of compassion, and putting it first before the quality of judgment. Compassion is how our world survives. Nobody and nothing endures without compassion. And we are here in this world, broken and imperfect. I would say we're beautifully and perfectly imperfect. And that our imperfections are what make this world so meaningful, because they are what allow for the possibility of growth. Teshuvah is only possible because our imperfections give us a place to work. They give us what to work on. So in other words, it's okay. And in other words, if there is an infinite creator, as the Midrash says, he, she, it made us this way. So anything that I am or I did that is imperfect is not only entirely my fault, it's also the human condition. It's also the way our species is. It's also the way this whole universe is. So I mentioned before, rachamim, compassion, in the tree of life for the Kabbalists is also the emet, truth, because that is actually the deep underlying truth of our world, of our universe, of our condition, of our existence. So it's very, very important that we enter into judgment and we really are able to bring a quality, even of harsh judgment, to ourselves and really hold ourselves to account. But the container is compassion, is rachamim. And actually, Nachmanides Ramban says in his commentary to the Torah, Rosh Hashanah is a day, it's actually 2 days, of judgment in compassion, of din barachamim. So we want the judgment, we need the judgment to grow, but it has to be in a context, in a container of rachamim. And what's this got to do with the shofar? Well, the shofar is the horn of the Akedah, the ultimate moment, actually, in our entire tradition of the quality of din or judgment. How so? Well, Isaac is the personification of the quality of din, of judgment, and the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, when he lies there and says, if it is the will of the infinite creator that I die in this moment, then I give up my life. I don't want to move. I don't want to ruin this moment. So tie me up even tighter to make sure I don't move. When Isaac says that, he is the epitome of din. He is being the most dinful, the most judgment-like, the most severe that any human can be in this world, because he's accepting the divine decree in the most severe possible way. That's the horn. That's where the horn comes from, the shofar. And the Zohar says that the ram's horn of Isaac, the horn of the shofar, arouses the powers of judgment, of gevurah, of severity. But very importantly, it also says that the way that we blow the shofar also arouses the powers of loving oneness, loving kindness, chesed, and of compassion, rachamim. And that actually, if we look at the order we blow the notes in, the Zohar says that the sounds of judgment, of severity, which are the sounds of brokenness, are always surrounded by the sounds of wholeness. The tekiah, the long single blast of the shofar, that is the sound which the Kabbalists say represents loving kindness and compassion. I would say also represents hope, and I would say also represents the birthing of the new people that we're becoming through this process. In other words, the hope of our future selves. The judgment is not just judgment for the sake of judgment, God forbid. When all this talk of severity and harshness is not an end in itself, but actually it's all for the sake of giving birth. Rosh Hashanah is the birth of humanity. It's the birth of our new self. How do we give birth to our new self? Through going through this process. Accounting, transparency, being real about what's going on, but also being real about what's going on in the spirit of compassion. And the shofar helps us do that with the origin, with being what it is, an instrument of judgment, and with the sounds of brokenness, the sounds of our broken hearts, that it helps us to open up a primal brokenness, a primal sadness that we have not been fulfilling our potential, and yet surrounding those difficult emotions with the tekiah, with the blast of a reassuring, single, continuous sound of hope, of continuation of life. So maybe so. May we do the work of facing what we need to face, but knowing that we do so, we do that work of din, of judgment, even if it can get a little harsh sometimes, even if it needs to be a little harsh to be real, we do it in a container of rachamim, of compassion, which is also the emet, the truth. That is the human condition. And may we give birth to our new selves, and may we go into the new year as new people with a bar that has been raised with new potential, so we can achieve more of what we're here to do, which is to be more fully ourselves. Shana Tova.